get the message every time that this is being recorded, so that's good. So it's still, even if there's not many of us, it gives me great pleasure to be doing this particular presentation with my colleague Lusizi, who is now from the Malawi University of Business and Applied Sciences. As I learned yesterday, which is now the Polytechnic, has been decoupled with from the University of Malawi and is now called MUBAS. So we should call it by its right name. I gathered the logo is still the same. Lusizi assured me. And we'll be talking about decolonizing methods and decolonizing interdisciplinary research and why we do it, and in some ways how we do it, and whether we do it well or not is another question that I'm sure Lusizi will also have some kind of thoughts on. So today, what we're going to try and define decolonizing, decolonizing and decolonization is quite heavy word that is much discussed in history, in psychology, in development studies, and a lot of other fields. We're going to try and define our decolonizing approach in relationship to interdisciplinary qualitative research in the Global South. In my case, certainly, I think in Lusizi's mostly as well, we are qualitative researchers. So we are looking really at people's perceptions on any kind of topic. Well, in health, in my case, I think Lusizi works across more of a range of topics. So we'll be identifying some potential areas of qualitative research projects where we could apply a decolonizing approach. We will then look at an example from a real life kind of interdisciplinary project that Lusizi and I were engaged for nearly 2 years, which was to do with addressing trauma from road traffic accidents in Malawi, and some of the methods we used in that. It was a very interdisciplinary project, so we'll come back to that. And then at the end of the session, the last 20 minutes or so, we'll kind of have a wee chat together. Sorry, my battery is about to run out. We'll have a wee chat amongst ourselves about, what your feelings are around this kind of decolonizing approach, and whether you think it could apply to research, whether it's in the UK or overseas, and whether there's any aspect you think you could be decolonizing your methods and your research. We have put references, both Lusizi and myself, throughout the PowerPoint. So look out for those references. They'll be there as well. And I think, will we share the PowerPoint after, Sydney? I can't remember.
We can do that, yeah, if you're okay with it. Yeah.
So you're going to be asking me, possibly, or you might ask me, why are we talking about decolonizing research and research methodologies in this symposium? Because from our point of view, most what we call wicked problems in health and in other kind of areas of work, because I assume that all of your participants are from different areas of work across the university, they require an interdisciplinary approach. Now, you cannot even look at a health problem without looking at environmental issues and other issues around that problem. So by nature, most of the problems that we try to tackle, Lusizi and myself, require interdisciplinary kind of approaches. Yet most of our interdisciplinary research is often born in the West, or what we call the global North. And I know that this is contentious. I'm going to refer to the global North and the global South, and Lusizi can maybe keep me right in terms of whether these terms are acceptable. But in our kind of research, we often talk about the West, the global North, where most of the resources are, and the global South, which is where less of the monetary resources are. But obviously, in our kind of work, indigenous knowledge, that means knowledge that is born in the locality in which we try to do our research, tends to either be ignored or just taken into account in a kind of a tokenistic way. However, different forms of knowledge are embedded in different worldviews, in different values, in different histories, and different local areas, ethnic groups. And even within our interdisciplinary kind of field, we can see that there's also a hierarchy of disciplines. There's hard sciences count more than soft sciences. Quantitative research stays more than qualitative research over the last few decades. So this matter to interdisciplinary research, in our opinion. I mean, we work mostly, Lusizi and myself, in a kind of overseas context where we have partnerships, interdisciplinary partnerships between the global North and the global South, and hopefully reciprocal partnership is what we're aiming for. So that is why we're talking about this today. So I just wanted to kind of kickstart. I know we don't have many of you, but and actually, if I don't know, are there only 4 of you? Is it only Corinne with us? Is that it? Or are there more people I can't see from here? If there are more people, please feel free to put your videos. It doesn't bother us at all. I just wanted you to think for a minute of what you think about when you hear the word decolonizing or colonizing or decolonizing as a research student, as a researcher, just to get an idea of what you think of when you hear that. So there's no right or wrong answer. It's just to get our thinking going. Any kind of daring participant wanting to jump in?
Well, I suppose I used to think about it as trying to unthink all the kinds of assumptions and backgrounds that I've got as a consequence of my kind of Western Enlightenment education. But I've come also to kind of add into that more recently the fact that colonialism is so strongly linked to capitalism, and kind of and thinking about how the ways in which we, not just about sort of our intellectual traditions, but also just our kind of our material traditions, how we deal with stuff and how we buy and sell and exploit, and so all that part of it as well, I suppose.
Yeah, that's a really good start, and you'll see I mentioned that in a couple of slides as well. It's what's left over from a political colonizing process, if you'd like. I wonder if Linnea and Stacey, I mean, they've been very shy without their videos on, but even if you're able to unmute, please just let us know if you have any thoughts around what decolonizing or colonizing means for you. Again, if you have any views on that.
I think for me, it's also to do very much with power. So questioning kind of what is seen as science and what is seen as knowledge, for example, the distinction between the two of those. The relationship that you have with the people you are researching is another aspect, I think. So when I think about it, I predominantly think of it in terms of power, really.
You are absolutely right, Linnea, and this is how we think about it as well. You will see I've highlighted certain words in our presentation, and one of the words I've highlighted is power, because inherently this is about power relation. Stacey, did you have any other thoughts that you wanted to share? Or?
Sure. I was also thinking along the same lines, as well as when your subjects, as you're doing your research, you have to understand the way their mindset is based on the way colonization took place. So how did that impact their thought process? And, does that impact the results that we're expecting from this particular research? And how does it impact?
I mean, you guys are just ahead of the game, so that's great. That's exactly what we think of as well. So you know that colonization, and you will all know that, it refers to the kind of colonial rule, the 1800s, where the richer, more powerful European countries such as Britain and France, where I come from, established their colonies, their empires in Africa, in South America, in Asia, in the Caribbean, in everywhere else. But exactly what Linnea and even Stacey and Corinne have said is colonization was more than a political and a geographical process. The power was also cultural, it was also psychological, and some of this has definitely endured. So it's exactly what Linnea said, is whose knowledge was privileged, whose knowledge mattered. So in the work we do around health, in Africa or in South America or elsewhere, the biomedical knowledge, the white doctors' knowledge, which separated kind of body illness and mind illness, became the kind of authoritative knowledge. It was in opposition to a lot of the kind of more holistic, indigenous, traditional knowledges that you may have found in, the north of Canada, that you may have found in a lot of parts of Africa, in Australia and many other places. So that kind of stayed and endured. And although there was a decolonization process from the 20s to the 60s and beyond, where countries freed themselves from that political colonialism, I think Corinne was right in saying that imperialism has endured and affected our relationships. That trickles down, into what we do, whether it's the World Bank or the IMF policies and the condition they put on the loans that they grant to other parts of the world. the kind of control we exert on less developed countries, I hate this word, less developed countries, economically less developed, of course, which means nothing, through other indirect means, through economic relations, and even all the way down into the mechanisms of overseas development aid, which everyone thinks is a world of do-gooders, but actually even in that kind of field, there are some forms of neocolonialism. So you will say to me, what's this got to do with research? And our interdisciplinary research has got everything to do with what we do. And increasingly, people like Lusizi and myself are asking ourselves these questions. To us, a decolonizing research methodology an approach is an approach which challenges the Eurocentric Western global North ways of doing research and the research process, where they risk to ignore, undermine, or misrepresent the local knowledge and the experiences of the marginalized populations that we wish to learn and work with and engage with. To us, this is what the decolonizing approach is about. And I've put some excellent, so the person I'll be doing my session in June at the Scottish Graduate School of Social Sciences will be Joanna Kekelame, who has written extensively in South Africa around the decolonizing process herself as a Black South African post-apartheid, doing some work around epilepsy patients in South Africa, and has found herself in a kind of a strange triple colonizing kind of experience where she has been a learned Black South African and was working with marginalized epileptic patient communities and found herself in a bit of the spot of the colonizer in a way. So it's really fascinating stuff if you're interested in those issues. So to go in, and please feel free to stop or comment whenever you want. So to us, you can apply this decolonizing approach both in research in the UK and overseas. You know, think of any research you might do here in the UK or in Scotland with refugees, with asylum seekers, with any other ethnic minority group, gypsies and travelers, you know, all kinds of populations, as well as the kind of work that Lusizi and I do, which is itself overseas. And we believe that you can apply a decolonizing approach to all stages of your research, from the moment you conceptualize it, to the way you set it up, the way you do your training and capacity building, the field work and the data co-construction that you do. And you'll see that very willingly, Lusizi and I have not called this data gathering or data collection, but data co-construction. To us, as qualitative researcher in those contexts, the data is co-constructed and arises of the kind of encounter between us and other participants in another context with their own histories and their own knowledge. And you can also apply this to stage 4, which is the analysis stage of whatever work you're doing, the dissemination, and hopefully any kind of intervention development that will come out of what it is you research. And we don't have the answers, but what we can give you here is a kind of a starting to think about the kind of questions you can ask yourself as a researcher that will enable you to apply a decolonizing approach. And that's what we're going to do in the next few moments. Does that make sense? If you have any questions, just please unmute and ask. So in stage 1, so you should see all my slides and all our slides with Lusizi are just full of questions. There's no answers, just questions. So we want you to ask yourselves in the context of any work you're doing with any ethnic minorities or any groups that are marginalized in this country or elsewhere, is who defined the research problem? Was it you, the researcher, who defined the research problem? Was it the indigenous community? By indigenous, I mean here, those who are native and reside in the area where you research. So I'm meaning it in the broader sense. So was it the people there, the people or the patients most affected by the research you're going to do? Were they the ones that defined the research problem you're looking at? Or was it you who decided this was what needed to be looked at and then you came with it? Is the research therefore based on the needs of this community or on funders' priority, or on your own priorities? Who is the research for? Is this research, you know, whose voice is it seeking to bring to the fore? And does that matter to you? Whose voice is going to come to the fore here? Where does your funding come from? How do we balance our funders' priorities? It's a very difficult, challenging environment for us at the moment with all the overseas development aid cuts that have been made to research, how do we balance funders' priorities? You know, the fact that they may be interested in older people this year and in this year and in water the next year, in something else the next year, with the needs of the communities with whom we want to engage. And was your research concept, your idea that was developed, was it developed with partners on the ground, you know, local academics or maybe people from the communities affected? And that requires, as Lusizi and I can attest in the project we've worked on together and the further project we're working on now still, I myself have been working with colleagues and learning from colleagues in Malawi for 15 years. And I have had the privilege of learning from people like Lusizi for the last nearly 3 or 4. This takes trust, it takes effort, it takes time. So we're not saying that decolonizing approaches are easy, but we're saying they're worthwhile, I guess. In the second stage, when you're lucky to be funded with your project, are you making decisions collaboratively at every stage of your project with your colleagues in Australia, in Malaysia, in Africa, in Kenya, in Malawi, wherever you are, or even with your populations here in the UK? Are you making decisions collaboratively at every stage? There's often training at the beginning of every project, capacity building and training for the team. So who is training who here? You know, is it you training your colleagues elsewhere, or is it you training each other? And, you know, are you reinforcing any European northern kind of paradigms of seeing things and methods? Are you pushing for methods that are the ones you're comfortable with, that are from the global north? And is the research capacity strengthening that you're doing, is it a goal of your project to work together with colleagues on the ground to reinforce and strengthen local capacity for research? So these are questions we would ask ourselves at that stage. There was a really interesting kind of a conference that you can see the PDF for just there at the bottom of this slide. And this Professor Hart, who is from SOAS, I mean, some of you might know SOAS, and School for African and Asian Studies, I think. He kind of narrowed it down to kind of 4 scenarios of research in low and middle income countries. And you can then tell me which one you think is decolonizing. There is the researcher soloism, you know, the guy who's an individual foreign researcher who conducts work and into another country, speaks to some indigenous researchers who we may or may not credit. Then there's the research Sherpa syndrome, we call. So that's a foreign researcher who designs the project. He might employ some local researchers or research assistants to collect his data. Then there's the kind of post-design collaboration where a foreign researcher might design the project and then invite partners in other countries to come in and apply for funding jointly. And then finally, there's the partners in design, you know, where the partnership starts at the early stage of design and continues throughout the entire project. In your opinion, which one is the most decolonizing way of doing this? You can feel free to jump in if you want. I think it's pretty obvious, but
say it's number 4.
It's definitely number 4 linear. So it's, but, and no, it may seem simple, but it happens all the time in research, all the time. So finally, your data co-constructing, you're out in the field and you're trying to do your work and you're thinking exactly, I think, what one of you said earlier, which is, you know, what is my relationship to these participants? Often in our kind of interdisciplinary qualitative research, certainly we'll be hearing, oh, the way to find the people you need are going through the gatekeepers in a context like Malawi. I hope Lusizi hasn't lost your connection. In a context like Malawi, you're there, you just, I can't see you, that's why. We are often asked to go through the gatekeepers to recruit participants and to engage participants, which, you know, in a place like Malawi will be the traditional authority leaders and the chiefs. But you must be quite careful again. Are you, by doing so, excluding certain other parts of the population? Are you reinforcing any existing powers? So you need to be careful with that as well. Are we engaging, Lusizi said very rightly, are we engaging participants because it's easier and it's going to make our research look good? Or are they really partners in the research? Do we have a memorandum of understanding with them about how we're going to do our research, how we're going to use the data? how do we ensure that there's informed consent from the poorest, most vulnerable people in the communities with whom we work, you know? And another great question that Lusizi put into this PowerPoint as well is, who owns the data? How is this data stored? Who has access to it? Does the data and the way it's collected respect local cultures and beliefs? Same with your methods, and Lucy is going to take over in a minute to talk about the methods. Which methods are you using? You know, are you using observations? Are you using interviews and focus groups, which are, you know, require a certain level of literacy and may not be the ones that are the most familiar to people in other places? And who conducts the research? Is it you? Is it local researchers on the ground? Is it translators? Is it academics? Is it other NGOs on the ground? Is it the community members? I mean, are you willing to work with the community members, therefore not seeing them as participant or subjects, but much, much more as kind of partners in constructing the data? So there's a lot of questions to be asking yourself. And again, at the end of your project, you've gathered or you've co-constructed data. Are you bringing this data back to sense check it with the people with whom you engage, you know, and who owns this knowledge that is created? How is it shared after the project is finished? So when you present, are you involving the participant to present? Are you creating a space for them to make their own voice heard? And if you write papers and you present at conferences, is there a balance here? You know, is it just the global north authors that are putting their names first? Are there our colleagues in the global south? Are they just the leading authors and we just co-authors? I mean, who is credited and where, you know? And beyond the end of your project, how do you keep your relationship with your participants? You know, are you using this research with them and their agreement to devise some interventions that can make things change and help? Are you re-engaging with them over time? Do you continue to work with them as partners beyond the end of your funding? I mean, these are real questions. So I want to put up that slide because it's really chimed with me when I read it, and I'll read it to you. And it's from one of the references that we put down, Lusizi and myself. And it says many researchers have been using our case. It's someone from an indigenous community in Bangladesh saying many researchers have been using our community people, our culture and knowledge to do business. For example, lots of student researchers get their academic degree using our knowledge. Lots of universities and research institute researchers have been making money by using our traditional knowledge. NGOs have been getting money from various donor agencies by selling our traditional knowledge we have gotten from these universities. What have we gotten from them? I have not seen any benefits from these researchers. Sorry, I can't see with the and their research for me, for my community and our culture. I see this research as a business making. Using our community, our people, our culture and practices. We are fearful when we hear the word research. It takes our time, it takes our knowledge and practice for other people's business, and we do not get anything from it. We do not even know what knowledge has been taken, how it has been used. All we get is a couple of drinks, tea and coffee. We do not want this kind of research in our community. We are so disappointed in any kind of research nowadays. We have not seen any finding from many of the researchers. They take our knowledge that we shared as friends. They used our knowledge for their discoveries, funding and academic degrees. We helped many researchers in many ways so that they could get the proper information that they were looking for. However, they did not give us anything. And that, in a nutshell, for me, is exactly what Lusizi and I do not want at the end of our research, if that makes sense. I find it quite a powerful quote. If you have any kind of comments, just please do jump in. So I'm going to hand over to Lusizi in a minute to talk about an example from one of our projects, which was called Safe Road Africa. And this was an interdisciplinary intersectoral research partnership funded by the HRC to develop and evaluate and disseminate innovative, sustainable solutions that could prevent and respond to road traffic related trauma in Malawi. Which is a place where sadly there's not a coverage of ambulances over the country. So people have to respond to the site of road traffic accidents and help as they can. And we wanted to find out what the kind of what the situation was and what people on the ground felt could be potential solutions and interventions. And I don't know if you can see my box here, but in terms of interdisciplinarity, we had people from health sciences, we had people from the School of Design in Glasgow School of Art, and digital design people. We had pediatric orthopedic surgeons, we had nursing and midwifery people, we had people from various angles of life, including Lusizi. I know she shows us unlisted there, but she can tell you herself that she's a lecturer and specialist in kind of communication and participatory methodologies in Malawi. So we had a breadth of different ways of working and different ways of looking at this. And our partnership lasted from 2018 to 19. And you can see Lusizi at work there in this photo in the middle. And we were trying to kind of investigate the barriers, facilitators, and the kind of cultural and contextual factors that could influence the community prevention and the response to these road traffic accidents. And Lusizi will tell you more in the next few slides about how we did this, whether we did it in a kind of a decolonized way, or what was the approach that we used as a kind of interdisciplinary project. And I'll pass over to her. And you can ask me, Lusizi, if you want to move the slides when you're ready. Oh, you're muted. I think you're muted.
All right, thank you. I am Lusizi Kambalame. I am from Malawi, and I am a lecturer at the just new Malawi University of Business and Applied Sciences. At the time that we're doing this project with ISA, it was our institution was called the Malawi Polytechnic, but we just delinked from the what was called the University of Malawi to now form a new university, which is called Malawi University of Business and Applied Sciences. So my background generally is in theater. I trained as a stage actor, and then moved on to do a master's in development communication. And so that's where I am settled right now in communication studies. And so I've known ISA since, I think it must have been 2017, before the project, when we had a chat around the problem of road safety in Malawi. So I've known her since then. We've done this project together, and we're moving on to other things as well. So maybe before I go on, if you do not mind, can you pronounce your names for me? Coming in from another country, English is not my first language, so I do not want to get your names wrong. So if you can pronounce your names again so that I can get them right and be able to use the right pronunciation.
I'll go first. My name is pronounced Linnea.
Linnea, all right, thank you.
Hi, you can say me as Corinne.
Corinne, all right.
I'm Stacy.
Ah, Stacy. All right, thank you. Thank you. So one of the things that usually happens for us is we usually tend to pronounce certain words differently. So I do not want to get into a situation where I'm not able to pronounce your names very well. So moving on to our project, Isa, if you can move on to the next slide. All right. One of the things about this particular project, I think Isa has already given the background that it was interdisciplinary, it was multisectoral. But one of the other things about this project was that it was a project, a collaboration between what we can call the Global South and the Global North. There were a number of people that were coming in from Scotland, and a number of us that were in Malawi. And so when it comes to the issue of decolonizing there, it wasn't what usually might actually be the case, where you have a researcher and you have the participants. In this case, it was a bit different in the sense that, one, it was almost like developing a relationship between the Global North and the global South. And in most cases, it was already a relationship in which, in most cases, when it comes to research, there is a lot of maybe what could actually be looked at as the traditional research methods, which are seemingly almost like continuing with the colonial practice. So the first thing was, we were a group of researchers that were coming in from the global South and some from the global North. And so that was the first point in terms of the decolonizing process that had to happen. How are we going to relate? How are the two, the global North researchers and the global South researchers going to work or collaborate on this particular project and ensure that it is a project that is actually not only there to work for the purpose of providing, let's say, or extracting knowledge, but that it was also able to be a process that benefited the researchers from the global South, and also created a relationship in which all of the collaborators involved were actually coming in to the table on a leveled playing field. So that was one. The other one is the relationship that is there between the researchers in the, for instance, in Malawi and the participants. In most cases, when we think of colonizing research methods, where in most cases it is applied to the foreigner or the one coming in from outside the research area. For instance, let's say Isa would come in into Malawi, and so you'd most certainly think about the colonizing, maybe research methods first. It would come to that, and maybe there isn't as much thought that is given to also the colonizing research methods between the indigenous researcher or the one that is within country and the participants. But in this case, we also had to give thought to that. Even though the Malawian researchers were, well, in-country researchers, they were still had gone through the Western form of education. They were still looked at as the ones that were in most of the literature that we look at. They define them as the elite, seemingly. So that was just to give the background in terms of how this project was, the context in which we're going to do this particular project. And so I would say that there were two pathways, or the two-path process for this particular research. The first part was, one, the researcher collaboration. I call it the researcher collaboration, the partnership between researchers from Scotland and the researchers from Malawi. And in trying to negotiate that, one of the things that actually happened was we needed to find a base. How are we going to work? We needed to define that, but also come to an understanding that culturally we are coming in from different worlds. And so there are always that stereotypical way of looking at work in that case, not only in terms of maybe the global North, but also the global South. How does the global South deal with work that they're doing with collaborators or researchers from the global North? What was our role in this case? Are we going to take on the role as is usually the case? I think the path that Isa talked about, it must be the third one, to say that you engage an indigenous researcher just to ensure that your work is right. For instance, to work as a translator, or to ensure that what you're doing is culturally correct. And so one of the things that we worked on was to be able to find a base, be able to identify the fact that we are all in this together. We're building a partnership. While the researchers from Scotland, some of them may never have been in Malawi, it was good to understand what Malawi is, and also be able to create a way in which we all of us would find our base and understand that we're working in this. It's a collaboration. We are partners from design. And so that was the first thing that that happened. And I think the picture there shows the time that we made. It was at the University of Stirling. I can't remember exactly where we took that picture, but that was then. And so it was in a way trying to get out of what one of the people that I've referred to, Linje Manyozo, calls the idea of the external and the internal researcher, the relationship that they usually have in the traditional research process, to say that the internal researcher, who is the one that is within country, is only there maybe to work as a translator, or one that makes sure that the work that the researcher is doing is culturally respectful. And it had to go beyond that, in that we had to work in such a way that everyone there was had to bring in something to the table as part of this collaboration process. Can I move on to the next slide?
Sure, sure.
All right, and then the second part came in when we were working with the communities. I think that has clearly been stated by Isa in the last slide that she presented, in terms of how participants or research subjects feel when it comes to the process of research. They feel that they haven't benefited much from this research, from any of the research processes. It is just being viewed as a process of extraction, you know, where their indigenous knowledge is used for the purpose of those researchers, and there's nothing that they get from it, whether it's feedback, whether it's what that knowledge is going to be used for, whether if it's going to create a product, or if it's going to result in certain data, how is that data going to be used? There's very little control that they have in the process. And so in our work, we felt that we needed to work with the communities in such a way that we needed to look at them as part of this particular process. And so this project was in two semi-urban areas. We worked with communities in two semi-urban areas. One was in Bangwe, which is in Blantyre, which is like the main, the commercial city of Malawi, and the other one was in Zomba, which was the old capital of Malawi. It was in Domasi. So the choice of the sites were really based on the road traffic data. We looked at where it actually showed the hotspot, where the hotspots were, and we picked these spots from what the road traffic data showed us or indicated to be the hotspots. And so when we entered into the community, one of the first things that we wanted to do was to be able to, from the word go, indicate that we are building partnership in this process, that the communities are not just working with us for us to be able to get the knowledge that we require in this particular project, but that they're working in this as contributors to the results, but also to the process of research, that we are not just going to be there to extract this knowledge or the information that we are looking for, or that we're not just going to be there in order to ensure that the data that we're actually collecting is correct. So we had a community, what we call a community entry meeting, to, first of all, seek permission. It is usually required in Malawi that when you get into a community, you need to seek permission to do some work there. So you seek permission from the community leaders. But apart from seeking permission, we also had to meet with members of the community to talk about what our project was about and ask if they would like to work with us. So we're there to seek permission, firstly, if we could work in the community, but to also explain what this project was all about so that we could seek approval. Not just in terms of ethics, but also in terms of the fact that we wanted them to be partners in it. And so we were not just there to extract the knowledge, but we wanted it to be we wanted them to be part of the process so that they are also aware of the fact that as we're going through this particular process, there's going to be a number of stages and there are going to be a number of outputs in all these stages. And if they would be interested to work with us in the entire process. So that's one of the things that we did. But apart from that, we also knew that if we were going to work with them in co-creating this project in terms of how it is supposed to be, we also had to make sure that there was consensus built. We had to agree on the fact that we all knew what was going to happen, and that is the process in which it was going to happen. And so we also went into the community so that we could explain what our project was and also be able to hear from them if they get what the project intends to do, but apart from that, whether that is how they would want to work with us. And if they were not in agreeable, then we'd actually be able to know, or if they wanted to somewhat make changes to some areas, then we could do that together and then build a consensus before we move on. So the first part was the research collaboration, and then the other one was the communities who together were going to co-create what our work was going to be. Right, let's move on to the next.
And we get more into the methods of how the kind of interdisciplinary methods we use now, which is really quite interesting. It was quite life-changing for me, certainly, I must say, as a long-term career qualitative researcher.
Yeah, so when we went into the community, one of the things that we do after we had managed to get their consensus and approval was, then they also needed as a community to tell us who we can work with and how we're going to work with those. So there had to be something that would actually guide how we're going to work. So having known what we're going to look at, what our focus was going to be, then we also had to know who are we going to work with in this particular project and how are we going to work with them. We had to be quite clear in terms of that. And we worked with communities, but I think I've tried to define what I mean there by communities. There were a number of them. One were the project intervention participants. That was the first one. The second were what we call stakeholders, or those that had interest in what we were doing. So it was the traffic police, the road traffic directorate, and Red Cross Malawi, because it had to do with road traffic trauma and all that. Yeah. So we also had to think of the healthcare professionals and then local leaders as well. So we then had, yes, Isa.
I think that ties in quite well with what Linnea was talking about. Not when you kind of have the privilege to enter a community in the way that Lusizi described, you cannot lose track of the fact that these communities exist within other layers within country, and the government in Malawi and the government structures have tremendous amount of power. And you cannot just go into one community and forget that there are other hierarchies and relationships of power that exist between the road traffic, the police, the local hospitals and everyone else. So we try to be mindful of that and to engage at different levels. And there is tremendous amount of power. I mean, one of my colleagues always tells this nice little anecdote of when we first met with people from the police department in Malawi. And my colleague Eddie and myself found ourselves waiting for the superintendent of the police, a very important person in this context, who then, you know, we kept asking all these guys coming into the room, are you the superintendent? They were like, oh, no. And so they all started sitting around the room, and then entered the superintendent. And the superintendent came in and looked at me and looked at my colleague Eddie, who was a professor at Sterling, and said, who is the professor here? And obviously my male colleague professor said, well, I am the professor. I being only a lowly doctor at that point. And he said, okay, therefore you will sit here and she will sit there. And he had to sit in the place of honor and I had to sit elsewhere. So my point being that we had our communities on the ground. We also had loads of hierarchies to be mindful of. Power structures, and in a kind of exercise that Lusizi is showing just now, just to give a little bit more background, one of the kind of areas we started discussing with the community is the possibility of having first aid responders in places where there was no ambulance service reach. So people would be equipped with knowledge to be able to help victims at the site of road traffic accidents. And in this particular kind of exercise that Lusizi will describe, we were trying to ask them, okay, what kind of values does a first responder need? What kind of tools does they need in their hand? How will they travel, which is around their feet? So the bubbles were representing what the community members would tell us. This is what's important. What kind of value system does the first responder need to have? You know, so they were saying things that he must be trustworthy. He needs to have a good heart, which in Malawi is extremely important, having a good heart, you know. And this is what the people on the ground here in these pictures, I think, were trying to do. Lusizi, correct, wasn't it?
Yes, yes.
So that was quite Go ahead.
We tried to work with the communities, as Isa is saying, to try and create the sort of like a criteria for deciding who the first responder should be. And in this particular process, it was quite important that they, as the community, should be the ones that actually are able to decide who they would want their first responders to be, because these are definitely people that are going to be working with them. And as Isa was actually saying, for us in Malawi, it's quite important that the person that is coming in, especially at the time of an accident, is someone that you trust. It doesn't matter that you may not know them personally, but you needed to, if it happened at any time, everybody within that community needs to know that the person that is coming to me is someone who only does not know how to do their work, but is someone that is also trustworthy. The reason is there are a number of problems that come into it that require that the person that is coming to help the person is someone who is trustworthy, because one, in most cases, the situation in Malawi is quite different from perhaps what could be there in Scotland, in the sense that hospitals are far, you do not have ambulances, and you may not have lighting on the roads, and so it's pretty dark sometimes when an accident happens in the evening. So you needed to have someone who can actually be able to be with you at that particular time and not think about all that situation, to stay with you until you get to the hospital, which might take quite some time. Right? So it was quite important that the people have to be able to decide, knowing the context, their context in terms of road accident, what would actually be there. So we first of all also did what is called community mapping, not only in terms of the persons that we were picking, but also in terms of the places where, for instance, if they wanted the first aid kit, to have the first aid kit, who keeps it? How are they going to access it? And all those things. So they did this particular process where we wrote out, it was actually paper, and then they would write, and then a number of questions, and then the members of the community could then be part of this dialogue, and in most cases guiding where it was actually going. So as Isa said, those bubbles are indicating what are the characters of those individuals, but also at the same time in line with their community. Where is the hotspot? Who are the people that can come in? What are the places in which the people can keep their first aid kit? What is going to happen, for instance, if an accident happens? How does the first responder get to know that there's an accident that has happened and all that? So we made sure that they were part of that conversation, because it is quite important that if this was to roll out, it had to be something that they could also own and be part of. And so that was a process, that was one of the methods that we used, that we felt made sure that members of the community were part and parcel of this process. We did a similar one with members of, for instance, the stakeholders. It was a similar one. Right. But for this presentation, we didn't put it up. The concentration is on the communities. The next method.
And I think I just wanted to stress that for you guys who are looking at this picture, is you can see that in this partnership that Lusizi described, I'm not in this picture. In this picture, you have Linda, one of our colleagues, who's one of the trauma surgeons, and you have some of our research assistants on the ground. The reason being that these guys spoke Chichewa and we don't, and that this work was happening on paper at the same time and written in both languages, and our colleagues, our research assistant colleagues here, were translating as well and writing on the map what it is that was being said by the community members. So that's another main reason as well. You know, that's another big part of decolonizing our work, I guess. And then more tools that we used.
Yeah. There were more tools. The other one that we used was role play. So we had members of the community try to explain the different scenarios that happened in terms of road accidents. What are the likely things that are going to happen? What are the things that they feel are of concern to them, critical in the process of a road accident, moving from what maybe is the reason why the road accidents happen, to when one is involved in a road accident, how do they get help until they get to the healthcare unit? So we felt it was quite important that we use role play, because it is something that comes in from the experience of the member of the community, or in this case, what we can call the research participant, rather than us just focusing on maybe guiding what we want to know. And so it was quite important that we are able to let this roll out. But one of the things about role play that happens is it's not just something that gets members of the community involved in the dialogue, but it is also an empowering activity. Empowering in the sense that in most cases, when you think of the traditional research process, it has to be the researcher who, in most cases, in my case in Malawi, when you come in as an academic, you're actually someone who people look at you as someone who's very knowledgeable, very respectful, you know. And so when you're asking them questions, they expect to answer, and that's it. It doesn't do anything to the relationship. It's a matter of the one who knows and the one who really doesn't know is just providing information because this one needs it, and will require it for something else that they do not know, you know. But we felt that role play would actually be something that would enable them to be engaged in this particular process and be in control of what was being said, but to also show that their voices matter and that they had to say it in the way that they wanted to say it, without the researcher guiding it and etc. And so it was just a scenario to say, okay, fine, what happens, for instance, during an accident? You know, can we try to explore what happens? Then they would then create all this, and then it would be, what is the situation now? What would you want the situation to be? So from there, I would actually be able to get an understanding of where they would want to go. you know, from the current situation, what would be the ideal situation. And so it gave them a voice in a situation where if it was any other research process, they would actually only be guided in terms of what was supposed to be said and how it was supposed to be said. And so we felt that the role play would actually be able to enable them, to empower them, to give them a voice and also a feeling that they matter, what they know matters, because that is one of the things about the traditional research methods, that most of the participants feel that what they say is not as important. It is just there to provide what the researcher needs, and what the researcher will come up with is much more important than what they know. And so we felt that role play would actually be able to do that. Yes, Isa.
And I think to add on to what Lusizi was saying, certainly even if you look into, I'm going to go back one slide, for example, where you see some of our colleagues, because of this kind of decolonizing role playing that was used using Lusizi and Linda and people who knew how to do this with communities to engage, we therefore, as kind of global north researchers, found ourselves often, like my colleagues here in this picture, sitting on the fringes of this, where we became observers of other people creating the knowledge. And that was really kind of uncomfortable for researchers sometimes. You know, we do like to be the center of attention, I think, in partly in the work we do. And we were very much not the center of attention here. We were kind of active observers of the knowledge being created and learning. And in some situations, there were some of us were taking notes with one of our colleagues, kind of translating almost constantly what the community members were saying, so that we could take notes. It was an uncomfortable and enriching kind of position to be in. And I think maybe for the sake of speed, Lusizi, we can gloss slightly over the knowledge sharing, which we did share the knowledge then with the more hierarchical stakeholders that you can see here, the police, the road traffic authorities, and people like that. But I like this slide. And Sydney, keep us right if we are taking on too much time now, because I want to have a few minutes with Corinne and Linnea and Stacey to discuss how they feel that could potentially apply to their research in the future as well. So you go on, Lusizi.
All right, so I think one of the things that perhaps in terms of the decolonizing research method, some of the considerations in terms of the methods that I use, the idea of co-creation and feedback. One of the things that I think is usually the case is that we extract the information and then we use it for whatever research purpose we want, and we leave out the participants, the ones that provided us with the knowledge. But we felt it was quite important that in this particular process, we need to go back, because we had already established anyway the process in which we're going to go, the different stages we're going to pass through. And one of the things we said from the beginning was that we want you to be part of this process from the word go. Whatever it is that we are working on here is something that you are part of and you need to be part of. But apart from that, the idea that we're going to come back. I think one of the things that, for instance, in the Global South, most of the research participants see is researchers coming in, doing the research, and then going out, and they'll never see them again, And for them, they feel that is a process that is quite extractive. You're just coming in, get, and then you move on. But in this case, there had to be feedback to say, this is what we have discussed in these particular times, and this is what we had actually gathered, and this is the stage at which we are at, and this is the information that we gathered, and this is perhaps how you are actually going to be able to proceed with this particular project. And so the feedback process, first of all, it created a platform for sharing of the knowledge that or the product and that we had created in the process. But also at the same time, it created co-ownership. because they had been part of this particular process. And so what was the output at each particular point was as a result of the work that we had done together. Yeah. So you can go ahead, Isa.
Sorry, I realized I'm
Hello.
mute. I'm sorry, I was very rude taking a phone call in the middle of this presentation. I'm dealing with a father-in-law and mother-in-law's problems at the same time. So this was a call from the nursing home. I'm very sorry. So just some thoughts for you guys. I think we have hopefully given you enough to think about. Decolonizing our approach, I wanted to say, it does not mean going native. So we are not trying to put ourselves in the shoes of the communities with which we work. We are trying to create a platform, exactly what Lusizi said a minute ago, for sharing knowledge and product and creation and co-creation. Also, we kind of, I think Linnea got us right at the beginning. We may well attempt to work in this way constantly in the work that Lusizi and I do, which is very time consuming. As it probably would be easier to do the kind of the first type that Professor Butt was saying, to have our ideas come in, ask a couple of local people to come along with it, and that's it. That would probably be a lot easier. Co-creation, co-construction, decolonizing approaches are hard. They're uncomfortable and they're hard. But try as hard as we may, we are also bumping against colonial, hierarchical, patriarchal political structures and societies which continue to remain in place. It does not befall upon me to change the gender power and imbalances and other forms of imbalances in Malawi. And therefore, I am trying to do my research in as decolonized a way as I can. And you must be aware that you may not make so much advance even by working in this way, but we do try, because we try to advocate for change. We try to advocate for the voices of those who are least heard to be heard, and that's hard work, but we just kind of continue with that. And so I just wanted to spend maybe a few minutes. I have no idea how much time we have got left now, Sydney. I've completely lost track just listening to Lusizi, but I'm just wanting to hear maybe from from Corinne and from Linnea, and I'm probably saying Corinne wrong as well, I realize. We'll send you the PowerPoint because there's a lot of really good kind of references there if you're interested in those matters. I just want